Stanford University.
All right, guys, welcome to CS 193P Lecture 11. We've actually got another exciting lecture today because we've got another guest lecture from Apple. And we'll get Brad up here in just a minute. He works on keyboards at Apple for iPhone and iPad. I ran a little bit long on Tuesday, so we or Thursday rather, missed out on some NS operation stuff that I really wanted to cover. So I'm going to try and get through that pretty quickly today before we get Brad up here to talk about keyboards. This is going to be a pretty important part for the next part of Paparazzi. We're going to be doing some downloading of data off the internet from Flickr, and as you know, we saw a little bit in the lecture last week that you kind of want to avoid having to do a lot of this stuff on the main thread, blocking the user interface and the user interaction. So in order to improve that experience, we talked about the possibility of using threads in order to get some of your behaviors onto the background thread so that if you're blocking waiting for data to come off the internet, you don't end up blocking the user interface. But the other option for doing that, which simplifies a lot of this actually quite a bit, is a class called NS operation. So I want to talk about that a little bit. A couple of announcements first. The Paparazzi 3 assignment, which was going to be using these things, will be due next Wednesday. Again, not too surprising, I suppose. Paparazzi 2 is due tomorrow, so we've gotten a few questions. Hopefully we've answered a lot of that. If you haven't gotten started, get on that. If you have, obviously we're still available for other questions. Any questions about Paparazzi 2 that everyone? Okay. Also, this Friday's extra session, we actually have a schedule for doing one this week, and we're going to be ready to go. Evan Dahl is going to be coming in to talk. I don't know, any of you may have heard of him before. He actually taught this class the past 2 semesters that it was given. So he's got a lot of experience with doing this. He used to work at Apple on iPhone and actually also worked on iPad. And so he's got a lot of experience with modal view controllers and UIKit in general. So very smart guy, knows a lot of stuff, and he's going to hopefully give us a great lecture on Friday. So if you are free and can come, definitely come check it out. Should be pretty good. So today we'll talk about threading, the wrap-up real quick, and then we'll get Brad up here to talk about keyboards, customizing text, and presenting content modally. We'll be using this in the assignment this week as well. So, all right, so alternatives to threading. This is kind of where I broke off last week. We're moving on now. Threading is a great way to get things onto a background thread, obviously, to avoid blocking your UI. Other options. There are a lot of asynchronous APIs in UIKit and Foundation, and actually throughout the iPhone frameworks in general. And the idea with those is we've talked about the concept of the run loop, and your application sits in the run loop, gets some callback, user input or something, does some processing, and then goes back to the run loop. The idea with asynchronous APIs is that the system can do processing and waiting on your behalf and call you back out of the run loop so that you don't have to block. So it basically lets you implement something similar to what select would do on a Unix system for listening on multiple pipes, but for all different kinds of things, including timers and network data, a variety of different behaviors and APIs. So some examples of that are NSURL connection, which has both synchronous and asynchronous variants. This is a class that lets you pull data off the internet from a URL. You can either do it synchronously and get the data right back, but you'll be blocking the thread, or you can do it asynchronously, and you'll get a target action. Basically, you can specify a target object to get an action called on it when the data is available. Another example is timers. You can have both one-shot timers, which you schedule up front and get fired at some specified date later. Repeating timers that happen at set intervals. Basically, all that's managed by the run loop. You can create these timers and attach them to your run loop. You'll get called back out of the run loop at the appropriate time without having to block the thread. And then there's this higher level construct called operations, which I want to talk about just real quickly here. So NS operation is the abstract superclass defined in Foundation that defines this operation concept. It manages the thread creation and the life cycle of these objects for you. So you don't have to specifically create threads and decide what operations are going to run on what threads. NS operation and NS operation Q handle that for you. It basically encapsulates a unit of work. You've got one photo you want to download off the internet, so you would define that as a single operation and put it on your operation queue. And you do that for each photo that you wanted to download. You can specify different relationships between these operations. So one operation requires that these other 3 operations finish first. You can basically define a graph of work that has to happen, put this all into the operation queue, and let it go. It will manage creating the threads for you and calling your methods, which we'll see in just a second here. And basically, it handles the specific complexities of putting things on the background for you. So it's really useful for that. All right, so one example, and probably one of the common ways of doing this, is you'll subclass NS operation. And in your subclass, you'll do an initializer. You'll initialize it with some object, and you'll save off that object. So this is the object that your unit of work is going to be working on. Then you'll override this main method, which is the method that'll be called by the NS operation runtime when this operation needs to start doing its work. So the runtime worries about scheduling it, and it'll call main on your object when it's time to perform whatever the work is that has to happen. And that's when you'll just do your time-consuming work. So the place where you actually enqueue these is another class called NS operation queue. And so operations are typically added to the queue in order to schedule them. You basically choose a maximum number of concurrent operations, the maximum number of things you want to have happen simultaneously, and the runtime worries about creating the threads for those things for you. And then the queue it'll run the operations based on a priority that you've defined. So you can say that some operations are more a higher priority than others, so they'll get scheduled first. And also the dependencies that we talked about. So everything that this object depends on will happen before this NS operation gets scheduled. So there's a concrete subclass that is actually provided for convenience by Foundation that makes a lot of this easier, so you don't have to go about subclassing all the time, and that's NS invocation operation. So it's actually pretty convenient for when you have just lightweight things that you can easily define in a single method. If you don't have a lot of data associated with it that would be useful to encapsulate in a separate subclass, you can just basically use this NS invocation operation, which you would call init with target self selector, whatever the selector for doing your work would be, and pass in one object. So if you don't have a lot of objects to associate it with it or a lot of data and you can sort of group it all up in one object, you can just use an NS invocation operation. So you don't have to subclass. You specify the target to do the work, the selector to get called, and the object to be worked on. And then you'll just add that to your queue like you would with subclasses of NS operation. All right, so we have a demo of that. We're not going to do it right now. If we have time at the end, we might get into it. Otherwise, we'll just post the code up so you can check it out. It's basically an expansion of the demo app that Chris did last Tuesday for the Flickr download. So pretty relevant, I'd say. Yeah, so if we don't get a chance to show it, we'll put it up for you. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brad to talk about keyboards.
Hi, I'm Brad. As Josh said, I work on keyboards and text team. So I'm covering two pretty disconnected topics today, and the only rationale for that is they're both relevant to the assignment, and they're comparatively short topics, so I think we can cover them quickly. But let's talk about iPhone keyboards and text input first. And as a philosophical digression, when the iPhone came out, the idea of a multi-touch virtual keyboard as the only input method for text was pretty unfamiliar, and so it's extremely important that users get a consistent experience with the keyboard. So whereas you might expect the keyboard is just some UI view that you can manage and install and animate however you wish, in actuality, as a developer, your only way to interact with the keyboard is with the text widgets that the keyboard inputs into. So you do have a lot of customization options there, but just at a high level, the keyboard is not yours. The system owns it, just as it would own a hardware keyboard. So with that said, let's talk about some salient features of the virtual keyboard. So one, it isn't there when you don't need it, and it's there when you do. So if you go into Safari and you tap on a URL bar in one version of Safari, you'll get this, and it comes up. You also have a nice landscape keyboard that some people prefer typing in. It works in either orientation. And we have customized buttons, you'll see. Well, notice it's go, and looking elsewhere, you'll see return. And our text widgets have a simple selection mechanism. You can select range text or move the cursor by pressing and holding, and you get a little loop or magnifier. And it's not as if you need to hold down Shift and modify with arrows. You're interacting with the text directly. So that's sort of outside of the purview of the keyboard. Other salient features. Well, there are a lot of highly specialized keyboards. And here you're typing a message. It looks like a standard concept of a QWERTY keyboard. You've got spacebar, return. But as you go to other contexts, you'll want to enter a URL. You get / and .com. You get pop-ups when you press and hold. The back keyplane has further specializations. And there's a whole litany of these. When you go to email, you get the @ sign. When you go to a phone number, you get something barely resembling a keyboard, but that too is a keyboard optimized for phone number entry. And we've got different looks and feels to different keyboards. This is an alert keyboard. And when you go to the passcode screen, that too, believe it or not, is a keyboard. So the keyboard appears in a lot of contexts and looks very different and is specialized to different purposes in all of them. But again, in all of these contexts, the apps aren't instantiating views. They're just describing the text widgets and customized properties on them. And we'll get to that in just a moment. But that's another very salient feature of virtual keyboard. And it's something you can only do with a virtual keyboard because you can adapt it to a task without going to a factory and popping off keys. So to talk about text widgets from a user perspective, we have single line editing, as in the search controller. And we've got multi-line editing, as you'd find in Notes. And this is a scrollable multi-line text container. And another really important user feature is you get a keyboard that works in your language. Many of us are probably going to use an English QWERTY keyboard. But we have a whole host of languages that are used throughout the world. And it's probably important to digress on this because a lot of people are interested in, well, the keyboard's just a view. I can put something on screen and it'll provide an alternate or optimized text input experience for someone. But you have to remember that you're cutting out a huge portion of iPhone users if you go down that path. So it's good to work with the system standard keyboard, and you'll get languages that are specific to what the user wants to write in. So to give you an example, we've got English, we have French, Russian. These are looking pretty familiar. There's Korean, and then there's Japanese Romanji. And you're seeing something where it looks sort of like the autocorrect input pill, but this is a multi-stage input method that's essential for Japanese users. And the keyboard supports all these different modes. We have a Japanese Kana keyboard with flicking enabled. We have Chinese pinyin. We even have something that, again, barely resembles a keyboard where you have stroke-based input. It's more like a trackpad. And all these work, and users expect them to work, and you get them for free just by installing text-accepting widgets in your application. So let's talk about how you as developers can interact with the keyboard. So we've got these text containers. The multi-line text container is UI text view, and the single-line text container is UI text field. And there are 3 ways you can really override them that should be familiar Cocoa patterns. We have delegation. We have notifications, for instance, when a return key is pressed. And we have methods and properties on the text views that you can set to change behavior slightly. Now, there's sort of an additional concept that is comprised of these, but is above and beyond them conceptually, which is text input traits. And text input traits is a protocol that's implemented by both UI text field and UI text view. And it's a design time thing. You set properties on your text field or text view, and it has no bearing on the text field or text view itself. Where text input traits come into play is when the keyboard appears. And text input traits are how you would customize the appearance of a keyboard. So examples of text input traits are keyboard type, return key type, all of these. And it's common to both of the text container classes, and it's how you get the specialized keyboard I was talking about as one of the important features. So an example of these is the URL keyboard. So we set this text field in mobile Safari, and the text input trait, the return key type is Go, and the keyboard type is URL. And so that's set up there in the container. And when you go to the search field, you now have a different return key type, and it's the default keyboard. So when you set these up on text containers at design time, you wait for the keyboard actually adopts these at runtime when the text instance, the text widget, becomes first responder. So that's a signal to the keyboard to both come on screen and specialize itself for this type of text container. Magic. And additionally, we have web forms in UI WebView and in Safari. You're going to encounter text widgets, both text inputs and text areas, and a whole new class of inputs with HTML5. And they don't offer the full range of customization that our built-in text input traits do. But using the HTML5 standards, you can get a number of customizations. You can have autocorrection attribute. You can have, for instance, the input type and pattern attributes to try to give a regular expression for your input text. And we'll actually look at that regular expression and adapt the keyboard to something that more precisely matches what you've specified. OK, so let's go through a really short demo on text input. And again, what that entails is, whoops, I can't see anything in this layout. What that entails is really just adding a text widget, because you have no need to manipulate the keyboard directly. So sorry, I'm not even in the project creation widget. So all right, new project. I'm going to create a window-based application. I wouldn't recommend this generally. You should have a well-structured application. But for the purposes of demo, it's easy to add a widget here. So I'm going to just go ahead and open the Zib, navigate the right, naturally. So I'm going to, you can watch me fight with the interface. But I'll just find a text field in here. I'm going to add it, do some usual things, maybe expand it out to the guides. Whoop. Set some, it's a view. I can set all the normal things like auto-sizing flags and IB. But now, well, let's just build and run this. So I've added a text field to my app. Build and run it, and already I have an app where I can get a keyboard and I can type. And it's as simple as that. And notice the keyboard is pretty vanilla, which is great for general purpose text entry, but let's try playing with some of the traits. So going back into Interface Builder, you can see I may not always use Interface Builder in day-to-day as I... The first, right, of course. So, and you see here, well, first of all, there are a number of properties that are common to lots of views, but ones that are kind of interesting to us are these text input traits. And I can change, for instance, capitalize to capitalize words. That'll capitalize the first letter of every word. I can change the keyboard to, say, be an email keyboard. And let's, for the heck of it, make the return key go. One other thing, you may have noticed that in Safari, you're going to get a Go key that turns a different color and becomes responsive only when there's text that's been entered. So I can automatically enable the return key. That, too, is a trait. So I'll make all these changes. And one other property that's unique to text fields is you can add a placeholder. It's a really compact label. And I might say, type something here. I need autocorrect on the hardware keyboard. But and as I go, you should have a very different experience. So there's my placeholder text. And now I've got a Go key that's disabled. I've got the URL stuff along the bottom. As I type, it's enabled. Let's see what else I can do. notice the first letter is capitalizing. So short and sweet example of manipulating the keyboard via text input traits and your text widget, but I think it suffices, and that's really all you need. And that's it for text input on the iPhone. Are there any questions? Or whoops, yeah. Where are the slides? Cool. So, if there are any questions about that, I'll move on to modal content present. Oh, yes, sorry.
So, will the keyboard just go away?
Will the keyboard go away? So, I really glossed over this, but it's implemented in terms of responder status. So, in your application, one thing is the first responder at all times. Well, no more than one thing is the first responder at all times. And so the keyboard comes up when you become first responder, and there's, for symmetry, a method named resign first responder. And when you resign first responder, the keyboard goes away. So that's generally how you manipulate. You can change your return key type to be a done button. There are lots of recipes for resigning first responder, but in essence, whenever you resign first responder status, the keyboard's going to go away. Or alternatively, if you have something that doesn't require text input become first responder, such as a vanilla view or an image. Does that answer your question? Yeah?
How would you set the keyboard traits programmatically, like in response to user settings or something like that?
Sure. So everything you see in IB is just setting properties on the text container itself. And it's a protocol of optional properties. I should have pulled up the header, but basically you just say text field set return key type with the argument and things such as that. And you had a question?
I definitely understand how to use the keyboard. I'm just curious. I think I heard our instructor say that you worked on building the keyboard app or something. I'm just kind of curious to hear about that story.
Sure. Well, I don't know how much I can say, but
Did you like build one of the buttons or something?
build one. Yes, I'm responsible for the Q key. That's all me across all languages too. No, but it's this has all been said up on stage by Steve and more eloquently too. But it's a multi-touch keyboard, and what you think you're getting is not really what you're inputting to the device. There's a lot of interesting probabilistic processing that goes on, and so while the targets are a little hard for an individual to precisely get, we use a lot of contextual information to inform the hit tests, and that's how the keyboard works. And I could tell you lots of war stories after class, but hopefully that's an interesting nugget. Modal content presentation. What's modal content? Well, it's when you want a user to perform a task and to the exclusion of all other tasks. And in UIKit, on iPhone OS, the way you accomplish this is by presenting a modal view controller. And some examples of this are when you're adding data or picking items. So alarm, for instance, when you hit the plus button, an entire view comes up in a sheet, and you can't switch between the tabs in the original view. You can't turn all alarms on or off. And you can cancel out of that, but you're entirely within that modal task as it's presented. Similarly, when you go to messages and want to enter a new text message, well, you're entering a modal presentation to just write anything. And additionally, when you want to pick someone from the address book, you're entering yet another modal state. So I'm pretty sure that went by, but okay. So you see there are two levels there. So you can absolutely stack modal presentation. They're a modal task within a modal task, and it's a good way of making sure that the user does something that's required and keeping it focused on one task at a time. So how do you present a modal view controller? It's ridiculously easy. You've been working with view controllers all around, all along. And the recipe is you take some view controller, and from that view controller, you present another view controller. So presumably this is in some subclass of view controller right here, and it's saying self-present mode of view controller, and you can choose whether it's animated or not. And it's going to come right up. Similarly to dismiss, you're just going to say dismiss mode of view controller animated. And in this case, you don't really need the view controller because it's presented modally. So one interesting nuance of modal view controllers is that as you present one, it has an entirely, or it can have an entirely separate navigation stack. So for instance here, I brought up my add recipe. Now, what I can do is go to the other view controller, the other navigation controller, and manipulate its navigation stack, animated or not, while this is presented modally. And so when I finish with this view controller, either by clicking cancel or save, I now have an entirely different view up in a point within the view hierarchy. And that's a common pattern you'll see that's appropriate for newly added entries. So dismissing the modal view controller. I said it was easy, and it is indeed, but there are a lot of ways to get there, and we have a strongly recommended way. So the best practices is to make sure, just like retain ownership, that the object that presents is the object that dismisses. And we think a great way to do that is to define a delegate method. And we've done this on all the views we offer to be presented modally. So the idea being you have one view controller that's going to present another, and it sets itself as the other view controller's delegate, presents it, and then the other view controller notifies with a delegate message the first view controller when its action is finished. And it's the original view controller that dismisses. And sometimes people get tripped up on this. They try to use say an address picker, and they present it modally and then expect the thing to dismiss itself. And that's not really the pattern we encourage. So whether using our built-in view controllers for modal presentation or your own, it's a great idea to establish a delegate. So in an animated way of describing it, we have a parent controller, child controller messages as parent, it's done. And then the parent controller goes and dismisses. Oh, wow. So that was all there was to say about modal view presentation. I'll give a demo a little more involved. Are there any questions before I go into it? All right, well, you can see from the code. Don't need type here anymore. So this time the project is all set up, and it's a more sanely set up project with good factoring of zibs. So the first thing I want to show you is the root views controller. It's zib. So that's picker's view. And so I look at this view. I have 3 items here, and maybe let's look at the file zoner connections. And you can see we have outlets and actions that sort of line up with the view. We've got buttons with actions. We've got image and text properties. So for instance, people picker's action is show people picker. Okay, so we want all these buttons to present something modally. It's the sort of add item case. So no changes to make there, and let's go into, oh, actually there is one other view controller class I want to show you, the type something view, to build upon our previous keyboards discussion. It's just a simple view controller with text field and a done button that's wired up to done button pressed. So let's go into pickers, and I'll navigate for the class. So in view.did load, I'm changing the text. You could do that in IB if you're used to using IB. And now the actions are exactly as I described in the slides. For show image picker, we're using the built-in, and you probably, this isn't wrapping, is it? Oh yeah, it is. Okay, it's just off screen a little. Excuse me. So the built-in UI image picker, we're allocating it and it choosing a source type, boilerplate things for the particular view controller. But the interesting thing for us is we're setting its delegate, and then we're presenting it, and then we're releasing it. And we can release it because the thing has been presented modally and is now owned by the runtime, the view controller system. So the delegate protocol, if I can find that. Oh, that's not going to help me. But the delegate protocol encompasses two methods that we're interested in. One is image picker controller. It's sort of the success case. Did finish picking image, editing info. Well, we're just going to take that image wholesale and dismiss it with yes. Again, this is the parent view controller dismissing the modally presented view controller. And we have a cancel case where we're not going to set any image. And so another very, very similar case to this is people picker. So we've got a AB people picker navigation controller. We set ourselves to its delegate. We present it animated. We release. And now we have a delegate message. So we look at the cancel first. It's similar, really identical to the image case. And then moving down to the success case, we want to take the text. But you'll notice this method returns a bool. And that's because this delegate method really controls whether you're going to drill down into further information. It should continue after selecting person. So I've selected John Appleseed, and this method is what we use to control whether you select his email address or just stop there. So we receive this message, and we tell it to dismiss after taking it. And similar here. Okay, so that's all shown, and I can just show you that these two indeed work with the built-in classes. Take an image picker, graduation day, and boy, that doesn't look like my graduation picture, but excuse me. People picker, pick a person, again, John Appleseed. What do you know? It dismisses. And let's go back and look at our own custom action, which is with our custom view controller, which is show type something. Now, the type something view controller, we alloc, we set its delegate, and we present its mode of view controller. But you haven't seen the type something view controller, so let me go into that class now. And it's pretty easy. We've got an action method for the done press, and we message our delegate. So sorry, you want to see the header first. We declare a protocol, the type something view controller delegate. This is a natural convention for delegates. If you take the class name and append delegate, and it has a delegate property. It's synthesized, but and it's a sign, which is common to to all delegates in Gogo. And then we define it down here, and there's no cancel and success version of this. It's just did type something. And so when the done key is pressed, we'll message our delegate, and the delegate can then dismiss the presentation view. And note that this is a view controller that needn't be presented modally. I think that's an important thing worth stressing. All these view controllers can be presented in different contexts. Certain ones are certainly much more common to present in modal presentation, but it's not necessary. There's a loose coupling between presentation and the view itself. So let's go back to our main view controller. And so when we show type something, we allocate it, we initialize it, we set the delegate, we present the modal view controller, animate it again, and we release it. And we follow the same pattern for dismiss. We get the type something label, and we dismiss the modal view controller. So I'll show you that very quickly. Great, and it works. Looks like we've got a lot of time, so I can go into some more tips and tricks. One thing someone was asking about, how do I, oh, yes, sorry.
Is there an advantage to using a mobile view controller as opposed to, like for the custom view controller you just made for the type something view controller, is there an advantage to doing it modally as opposed to just pushing on a navigation stick?
So it's really, so to repeat the question, is there an advantage to using modal presentation? And there absolutely is in a context where you have a modal task to be presented. It wouldn't make a great deal of sense to have a picker that you push onto the navigation stack and then choose something and then come back into it. It's just an HI convention, human interface guidelines, that when you're going to add or select something from a list, the natural thing to do is present it modally. So in terms of programming convenience, certainly not, but it's the right feel for the iPhone OS. So one thing I wanted to mention, yeah?
Can I just add one thing to that? It's also kind of a conceptual thing. So everything that you see in your navigation hierarchy is generally a collection of things that are linked. So your first element in the hierarchy is the list of users. The second thing is a list of their photos, and the last thing is the actual photo. If you wanted to, like, for instance, select a new photo to be assigned to a particular user, that's not conceptually part of that hierarchy of things. It's a separate operation that kind of is happening outside of the viewing of this large, list, this large hierarchical data set. So it's kind of it's a separate operation that's happening related to it, but independent of the data that you're viewing. So presenting it modally kind of gives it its place as something related to, but not part of the data. Kind of groups it off to the side on its own.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you were asking earlier, how do you make the keyboard go away? And there are a lot of different ways to go there. If you look at UI text field, you're going to see some delegate methods that are sent when text is entered, the return key is pressed, notifications when the return key is pressed. And you can use any of those to key off resign first responder, or to send resign first responder. But one thing that's pretty darn easy, and it's, yes?
Could a thread make the keyboard go away while the user is using it?
Sorry?
Could a thread call something to make a keyboard go away while the user is using it?
So resign first responder is a method on UI responder and UI view. And so UIKit is only really advertised as, and it is only thread safe on the main thread. So you wouldn't want to call directly from another thread, although you could certainly use the convenience on NSObject form selector on main thread to resign first responder against another object. Does that answer your question? And I'm sorry, you asked, could another thread dismiss the keyboard by calling resign first responder? So that was totally out of order. My reverse Polish notation answer. But does that answer your question? Or were you getting at something else?
I'm just wondering whether it's inside that modal dialog and the user has complete control until he gives it up, or whether you can interject.
No, programmatically you can absolutely resign first responder. And I'm actually going to show you an example right now. So I go in here, and you see a number of events associated with the text field. And, oh boy, this is going to be fun. So I get my file zoner on screen. And one interesting event is did end on exit. And with did end on exit, by simply attaching an event and by wiring that to a method, in this case I'm going to wire it to done button press so it calls the delegate message and the text is set up. But by virtue of setting that up, the keyboard is actually going to dismiss when the return key is pressed. So I don't know that that's a commonly known trick, but if I then, assuming I save this, if I build and run and go in here, type something, and hit the done button. Sorry, that's not, well, I wired it up to the donkey, so actually that wasn't the best action because it would have gone away in any case, but you can take my word for it, rather than watch me define a new IB action. And there are actually some other flourishes we can show you. If we go into the picker's view controller, one cool thing is, let's do this on the people picker. There's a modal transition style, which should be abused with caution, but it's really fun. And there are places where it's appropriate. So if I set modal transition style equals modal transition style, for instance, flip horizontal, by simply changing this transition property, and you can guess from the name that it affects transitions as the content is presented modally, I'm going to get a whole new look, and there are 3 of these you can choose from, and it's a card flip without really any additional effort. So if you have an application that lends itself to a card-like interface, please use this, and otherwise, please stay away. but it's cool and easy, and there are other modal transition styles. But that's really it for the demo. Presenting modal content is easy, and I hope that's a take-home from this. So thank you. And do we have anything else? So, oh, yes, you had a question.
Could you just encapsulate what you mean by modal again? Are you talking about basically the view flipping up from the bottom? Is that modal?
No. So you're asking what does modal mean? What does that encapsulate? And while on the iPhone OS, the modal presentation style is to bring something up from the bottom, and that is the look and feel of modally presented view controllers. By modal, I mean a task that can be performed in a mode. So, I mean, the idea being you can't do anything else when you're in this mode. As you hit the add button, you no longer have the other navigation stack or the other clocks to manipulate in the examples that were in the slides earlier. So,
Like the people picker.
yeah, for the people picker, you're choosing an item, and you have to do this in the people picker choosing mode. Okay, hope it makes sense. Thank you.
I just want to call out, thank you, Brad. That was awesome. That was great and brief and
Yeah.
helpful. I want to call out a few things for assignment 2 that we've had questions for over the last few days. The first thing, when you get started, when you drag the Flickr fetcher files into your app, into your project, you'll notice that if you just drag those in right away, it's not going to build. I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do, but note that we're using something new this week. We're using core data, so you may have to import something else for that to work. I'll be that vague. Another thing, which is actually our bug that I apologize for, we've changed it. We changed it on Sunday, so the new files that are up there now are correct. But if you downloaded the files before Sunday, we had a hard-coded string for the class name where it said Flickr, I think it said Flickr user. So we were assuming that your core data model object had an entity name of Flickr user. If you have the old files, I would encourage you to go download the new ones and replace the Flickr fetcher files. You should do that. If you do have the old files, you could also just go and change that string so that instead of using a hard-coded string, it takes the entity name variable that gets passed in and replaces it. And I think, well, the last thing we do is we are assuming, another assumption that we shouldn't have made, that when you call fetch results for, I forget the method name, one of the 2 convenience methods that we gave you, not the one that produces a fetched results controller, but a one that produces an NS array or NS set of data, we're assuming in there that the instance variable in your user is called name, lowercase name. Again, you can go and change that if you like, or or just make your class use an IVAR named name. And I think Josh is pulling that up right now. Oh. Okay, no, that's fine. So those are the 3 things I just want to point out. If you're running into trouble, if you didn't catch all that, email us on the class list. Yeah, those things should help you get through the assignment. So I hope everybody's started it or started looking at it. It's a little tougher than assignment 1, as it should be. So get going on it.
So I just wanted to point out this one thing one more time, because it actually isn't in the walkthrough, but it's pretty important for importing your data. So when you're reading the existing plist and trying to import it into the new core data database, the way that you want to add objects to your manage object context is with this NS entity description class method called insert new object for entity name. Sorry, for entity for name in managed object context, which basically you take the entity name that you've defined in your managed object model. So in our case, as I was just talking about, what we had called Flickr user would be the entity name for the user. And you pass that as a string to the entity for name. And then in managed object context, you can get the managed object context from the Flickr, what's the name of the? Flickr fetcher, right? And we're setting up the managed object context and the core data bits for you. So you can just get the managed object context from us from the Flickr fetcher and pass that there. And that'll allocate and instantiate a new, basically it'll create this object in the core data database for you and return the NS managed object that represents it so that you can use it then to assign photos to. And if you need to get it back, there's actually another convenience method on Flickr Fetcher that gives you back an array of objects matching a particular predicate. So kind of maybe a little more hint than we had given before. But so yeah, keep an eye on that method. Insert new object for entity for name in managed object context. And unless you have anything else, I think we're done for the day. So thanks.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.